Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Lagunitas IPA of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka who the fuck broke my Flotsam and Jetsam commemorative plate?
And well, now it's Jetsam. And I am the black metal guy, aka Emperor, but Mortis stays in the band, and together he and Samoth have a combined might that enables them to overthrow Ison, and to conquer him and make him their keyboard slave. And together they determine the direction of the band.
Man, in a better world, dude.
Yeah.
Man, was there anything more disrespectful than Samoth's listing on Prometheus as additional guitars?
Ugh. I don't even know that. I don't even listen to Prometheus, so that's.
Well, yeah, nobody does. But yeah, that's literally how he's credited. That's how he's fucking credited.
Oh, man, we should make Samoth a meme. Samoth, the guy in the band who just wants to play like riffs, and oh man.
Well, I've always said Prometheus is it's the first Ison album. Nine Equilibrium is the last Emperor album.
So, so I was thinking about that possibility because I was, for reasons that will remain undisclosed, studying up on the Werewolf discography, and was listening to the True Werewolf comp Total Death, and, Death Music, and it was, and it really sounds kind of like if you just took the sound on the Emperor EP and, like, kept it, but made it even more brutal and simple.
Good.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, it's simple, heavy bass-driven riffs. And, like, blast beats almost the entire time, and keys that kind of do the Emperor thing, but in a very less frilly way. So I was thinking about that, and then that led me back to Mortis, and so I hadn't been too impressed by the synth shit I'd heard from him before, but I listened to Flotilla Herska again, and wow, that's good.
I don't think I've ever actually listened to, like, a full Mortis solo record. I'm gonna
now have to try 2 and 3 again, but from what I remember, Anden som Gjord Uproar is a little more austere, and I like it less.
Yeah, because I listened to, I had one of the CDs by one of his side projects, the dark ambient one. I forget the project's name, but the album was called Selfmord. That's like his more, like, gloomy, depressive sort of thing, and that was pretty good. But I don't think I've ever listened to, like, Crypt of the Wizard or anything.
Yeah, so it's like, the interesting thing is that it helps you understand Emperor better. It's like, or it helps you understand a number of things. So, what you realize when you listen to that is that, the classical influence in Emperor wasn't just, like, Ison, right? I think they met in part because they were, like, super prodigy. Him and Samoth met because they were, like, prodigy teen musicians or whatever, and they did play classical stuff. But, Ison's the guy with the ambitions of making, like, metal classical music, right?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out really Mortis was, too. I thought they were these kind of, like, understated, atmospheric, kind of, like, fantasy game music, and they kind of are, but, like, Flotilla Herska has, like, movements. The entire first track has, like, it's structured like a symphony. Or maybe not exactly like a symphony, but by someone who listens to symphonies. It's got, like, a theme that sort of starts to build up and then subside away, build up and subside away in this kind of Wagner-y way, and then it finally just comes out. And he does all sorts of shit with it. He brings in kind of unexpected melodies in the middle of it, and he sustains this over a fucking half hour. And the second track, and there are melodies in it on the keys. Like, at some point he hits this big, like, 1 minor 6 type epic thing that's not so neoclassical sounding, right? It's like he's doing it on keys, but it's like, okay, that's a Satanic Warmaster riff. Like, there's gestures there at sort of like triumphant medieval sounding stuff that gets translated into guitar by other people, I think. But the second track, it's not as... It doesn't have quite this, like, grand, inherently memorable theme, but all the same sort of developmental stuff and interesting composition is happening on the second track. So he really had an ear for that. Cool. Yeah, and so this, like, I mean, honestly, like, that is a neoclassical album, in, like, a non-trivial sense. And so this leads me to a second thing, which is, well, why did Mortis get kicked out of the band? They said he had a bad attitude. What does that mean? I think it means, well, maybe he didn't like, the direction Isan was pushing it, is one way of thinking of it. But it seems like he actually had kind of similar goals, right? Black metal, classical music. I think they kicked him out because he was lazy. You
think so?
Well, think about this. The further away he gets from Emperor, the worse the music gets. Right? Yeah. Like the synth stuff starts dropping on. Like, Fod de la Herska is like incredibly high effort. Mm-hmm. Like, he probably drew it out on paper. I don't know if he wrote sheet music, but like he probably had a map of it somewhere. Or he just recorded it over, and like he probably spent a really long time on it. And the stuff after that gets progressively like more and more like synth pop and then industrial, and eventually he realizes, oh, you can go to goth clubs and like pick up chicks. Wow, this is cool. I'm gonna make a band about this, right? And it's not until people discover his old discography and that starts to become even bigger, much bigger than his industrial stuff, that he goes back and makes Spirit of Rebellion, which I haven't heard, but people say is quite good and sounds like the old shit.
Well, I'll have to go back and check it out.
So this is a full circle thing to semi-Isan apologism, which is just that, like, Mortis needed Isan. He needed Isan to push him, but Isan needed Mortis to help him not be a fucking... not be an art ponce.
if only they'd stayed together, Isan's dick too could be a skull. So,
wait, is Mortis's dick a skull?
According to the cover of the Stargate, yes.
Oh,
that's the one that's the classic one where he's flying and his dick's a skull.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. Well, that's sort of traditional Danzigian ceremonial garb.
God. All right, so that's an interesting detour into metal alternate history.
Yes.
But
people who know more about Emperor drama, feel free to correct me or add your own versions in the comments.
Yeah, or feel free to confront us aggressively on social media. That was a good one, wasn't it? The Death Metal Guy on Facebook at Terminus Podcast, and the Black Metal Guy on Instagram at Terminus Extreme Metal. And then if you're so angry you need to have a live back and forth over our theories about Emperor and Mortis, you can subscribe to us on Patreon or Subscribestar. $3 and up gets you access to the Terminus Prime bonus episodes. $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle, our Discord server, where we argue about things like this precisely. And $10 and up gets you access to voting rights to determine what the next Terminus Prime will be about. So now that the housekeeping's out of the way, now that the skull dick is firmly lodged in our minds, we actually have sort of coincidentally a thematic episode for the first time in a long while. I think sometime last year we had like an all-Finnish episode, and this time we actually have an all-Portuguese episode, which is kind of... the stars all just kind of aligned with a battery of new releases coming out.
Yeah.
And you're taking point on this one because we got a mini review for a band that I think is kind of like near and dear to your heart, or at least some of your associates.
No, near and dear to people I respect, or you know. So Mons Veneris, Torches of Entrancement is the new EP. It's probably a 7-inch. It's a short one. It's just 2 tracks. It's out now on Signal Rex, one of the in-house. Well, one of the 2 major labels for the Portuguese scene, the other one being Altare. Is Altare Portuguese or Basque? I think it's Portuguese.
I think Altare is Portuguese.
Yeah, I think it's Portuguese. But they put out some of the Basque bands. Yeah. Anyway, yes, the mountainous hatred of Spaniards. But so Mons Veneris is one of the core bands of the Portuguese underground that's existed since the early 2000s. They were spoken of. Well, before I get to this, I'll just say they were part of this circle that was called
just Black Circle.
The Black Circle. Along with Ire, right? Who we've covered on this show. And, the guy from Ire also plays in Morte Incandescente, who we covered, right? That's Vulturious. I believe at some point they shared members, but I don't know, because all the info for some of this stuff is gone from Metal Archives, and with a notice that the Black Circle disbanded this year.
That's very odd.
So, and yet, there's a ton of stuff coming out of Portugal. So, and, specifically the people related to this scene. So, something is fishy.
Yeah, something odd must be going on.
Yeah.
We'll have to reach out to our intelligence contacts.
Yeah, the oversized, wickedly curved knives are out in Portugal. Yeah, something's going on. We'll figure it out. So onto the music. So the reason these guys are on my radar, and that whole Portuguese scene is mostly just because back in the day, Lamb from Sanguine Eagle and Hand of Glory spoke, and some of his friends from House of First Light spoke very highly of this. And this whole scene, but I think especially Mons Veneris. And it wasn't really my thing when I checked it out, but it's something that was, I think, influential to them. We generally associate Hand of Glory, right, with the French vampiric bands like Mutilation, right? But there's some specific features about it that set it apart. For instance, Hand of Glory is spectrally disorienting. And now that I hear the Mons Veneris, I get a sense of where that was coming from. So here, let's listen to about a minute and a half into To Poison the Feeble Nest of Light. And yeah, let's just go in there. fucking bang your head, man.
Whenever I listen to stuff like this, I always kind of wonder, like, how you get guitars to sound that, like, fucked up and retarded. Like there is kind of a skill to doing that. Like, I don't know how you go about making stuff that sounds like this, you know? It's not a matter of just, like, having shitty production. It's, like, very precisely arranged.
That's a really good point. Yes, this is a far cry from Varg just plugging into the PV amp and playing, right? This is, because it's simultaneously thin and blown out and distant.
Yeah, it's like, how is the guitar, like, going in and out of phase with itself, you know? Like, how?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two guitars there, maybe.
Well, I'm also curious about just, like, the methodology. It's like, do you
There's
think...
some cool harmony there. They're like there was a kind of big riff during the blasty part, you know. And then those two, that kind of alternation kind of sustains, but under it you get a...
So do you think this is, like, you think this is mostly improvised?
It very well could be. There are only two guys on the cover, so if there are multiple guitar tracks, I don't know how they got it, but the core of it definitely has to be improvised, and you'll hear that more on the next sample. Or if not improvised, at least very, very composed on the spot.
Well, I think it's probably a case where it's like they've got a general idea of the number of repetitions for certain ideas, but then they just, like, go off and they'll just fuck around within those constraints.
Absolutely, and it really goes... They're going in that direction here, because, you know, you get their sort of sick parody of a big 6/8 headbanging moment, right? And then they just keep that beat, I think, for most of the rest of the track, and it just gets more and more sort of decrepit and fucked. And you can tell that the guitarist has a lot, but without, like, losing the momentum, crucially. But you can tell that the guitarist really has a lot of freedom. And there's a lot of cool improvisational noise stuff being done on guitar, which I like a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. You definitely get that quality of that. The beginning of that definitely does reflect the like gorked heavy metalisms of, like, that Morte record from last year, and then it just, like, dissolves even further from that.
Yeah, that's the beginning. It's definitely, the first thing is definitely a Morte riff. Jump, 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 jump. And you said it's like those Secret Agent Man riffs, right? And it's also kind of like those sort of Killing Jokey Chug riffs, but it's kind of like a combination of those together, right? It's like... It's
cool. I like that more than I anticipated. I think this is a fun band because it looks like they've just done, like, a million little demos and stuff. So this could be a band that I just start diving into like it's a very long anime or something. It's like, all right, let's just start going through these. You know?
Yeah, if I had a different, like, if I had parties with the right people, this would be good party music. Like, I don't think I would put it on normally to listen, like, it wouldn't exactly be, let's put on some black metal and get pumped kind of vibe, but it's so engaging and live sounding that it would be fun to listen to with other people, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you're just kind of cackling at how fucked up it is.
Exactly. It's speaking the other point, like that riff at the beginning, the sort of skronky Killing Joke Secret Agent Man riff. It has that kind of, you know, Tom, right? Is that kind of heavy goth or death rock beat, and that stuff that's at the very genesis of the House of First Light sound. If you go back to the first Vord demo, it has that kind of, like, gothy thing, and it also has this kind of production, maybe a sort of louder and more varied, but it has this kind of production so hideous it's deliberate in some way, or guitar tones so hideous it's deliberate, and it has this sort of disorienting, phasing, things coming from all sides of the room kind of vibe. And, you know, obviously those guys were listening to a also just listening to a bunch of, like, Joy Division and Killing Joke and, like, actual goth rock. But I'm guessing Mons Veneris was important to them even back then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, so we got all the serious musical points out of the way. Now we're just going to listen. Speaking of party music, going to the second track, and, you know, the cool thing about being an established band with an underground reputation is that you can just bring all your friends over to the rehearsal bunker, get shit canned, and make cool ghost sounds. Yeah!
Man, I wish I could do this. That's what I need to do. I need to get a garage and a 4-track and just cut a bunch of demos like this, you know? Just for fun, you know?
I mean, do that with the bud you've been working on your sort of solo stuff with right now. It's like, I mean, this sounds so fun. And more than that, you know, you initially think this is a sort of throwaway nothing track, maybe, at the beginning of it. And then they just, I mean, when we start, we're like we're well into the track. This is actually longer than the first song. And as you just heard, clearly this happened as improvisation, but I think there was some conversation before about what they would do, or an initial version of this. Because, like, there's, like, the heart, with those wailing vocals, those are, like, there's an actual, that's not just random sound. It's not, like, I don't think it's easy to make a falsetto that sounds that broad, right? It's not just, like, going, ee! Right? And it's, they're harmonizing.
I'm gonna sample you making that sound and just drop it at random points in episodes. You should. It's a sound effect.
They're air horn. They're harmonizing, in a way that's like not. If you're not, you have to. That's like, if you're not a trained singer and you're trying to just harmonize with someone, it's really hard because you instinctively sing the same note. Maybe he went back and overlaid his voice over it twice, but it sounds like the harmony really sounds like it's part of the moment. And they've got another guy in the background making a different kind of decrepit sound, like sort of a kind of rhythmic, like rah, 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 and they overlap. And the stuff on the cymbal, it's not just random drum. It's not the abruptum random tom hit. It's like, this is sort of like sustained kind of pressure on the cymbals. It's kind of like a whisper blast. You know, it's actually like, it's yes, it's hilarious, but it's also like pretty substantial.
Yeah, it's clear. I mean, this definitely sounds different, but it's clear that Abruptum is like a huge influence here, as well as like a lot of like the spooky LLN like noise ambient stuff they did. Clearly, these guys are like exclusively listening to like dusty cassette tapes from the mid-90s, you know, which is, that's a pretty cool aesthetic.
Hi, this is Taylor from Crushing the Scepter, and you're listening to Terminus Podcast.
All right, we are back, continuing our tour around Portugal, with the new record by an old favorite of mine, Corpus Christi's The Bitter End of Old, out on Immortal Frost Productions, who I wasn't familiar with before this. I guess they're a Belgian label. They've actually got a pretty big set of releases they've done. I guess I just never really heard of it before. Just a lot of bands that I haven't heard of, but you know, pretty good set of CDs and vinyl releases. So anyway, Corpus Christii. Corpus Christii is a band I've been a fan of for a really long time, like ever since I was a kid. I don't know if I told this story on the show before. I might have mentioned it in passing, but back when I was in high school, in the mid 2000s, there was a guy who worked at the Frontline, which is a venue in Belgium, and he would do soundboard recordings of all sorts of bands that would pass through. Usually, you know, decent sized but still very underground bands. And back then, I would listen to all those and just find out about all these new bands and shit. And one of those was Corpus Christi. So my first exposure to them was like a really raw, nasty live recording of them at the Frontline. From the early 2000s. So, and that means it was probably one of the first, like, super underground black metal bands I really listened to as a kid. And I've followed with them ever since. So, those who aren't familiar, Corpus Christi's been around a long time. First release, first demo was in 98. Features Nocturnus Horrendus, who is also in Morte Incandescente, as well as a bunch of other projects. I know Vulturius from Irae was doing live stuff for them at one point. Right now, it's just two main guys. It's Nocturnus Horrendus and a guy called J. Goat. And it, like all of these Portuguese bands, they're all kind of filtering in and out of each other's bands. Everybody's playing live for everybody else, that kind of thing. So the lineup isn't exactly consistent, but it seems to be, as far as the records go, it seems to be just these two guys right now. It's been 5 years since the last Corpus Christi full length, Delusion, which I don't believe I heard, but the one before that, Pale Moon, I really like a lot. It's very direct, very down the line, straight up black metal for people who are like well versed in the style. And that's kind of a similar case with the new record, The Bitter End of Old. This is a really good black metal album, like, by and for serious black metal listeners. This is not the sort of thing that is going to get you clout on Instagram. It doesn't feature a whole, at least in my opinion, it doesn't feature a whole ton of, like, just, like, riffs that jump out at you. But it's structurally elegant. It's really smart. And it's just a really sophisticated, well-rounded, very full-spectrum kind of black metal record. And I think, Black Metal Guy, for you, I don't think you've ever listened to a full album by these guys, right? What did you think of this?
No, my main experience of, these guys has been just the related projects on the show. It's related projects on the show, and like so Morte Incandescente and Irae mainly. And so I can immediately hear the similarities to Morte in certain ways, which I'll get into more. This record seems like a more modernized, wide-ranging, kind of a high production value take, a sort of expanded and refined version of some basic techniques that are in the Morte. Which may not simply be restricted to Morte. They're kind of versions of. There's a bit of it in the in the Mons Veneris we just heard, but but really my overall read on this is My overall read on this is that this is kind of like the record that 2012 needed.
I like that description. During the dark days, yeah.
Yeah, like, it's kind of, it, in some ways it could have been made then, but maybe in other ways, in other ways not. What this is, it sounds, the overall effect is a lot like Orthodox BM. You know, there's distinct Portuguese touches on it, but there's a lot of French influence. There's this kind of mayhemic vibe. But overall, right, it's this sort of smart, epic, brutal, down-the-line ripper that Orthodox BM never succeeded in producing.
Yeah,
like,
that's true. Yeah, it's so much more straightforward than any of that.
It's straightforward, but it uses a lot of techniques that were important then. The ways of shaping melodies and riffs are similar. The production values are similar, although a little crisper, which I like. You know, like, I can think, like, Arrow and Heart by Aosoth is, you know, a better record, but that's a kind of idiosyncratic masterpiece.
Yeah, that's a once in a lifetime for a band kind of thing to put.
Once in a lifetime for a band, and it's not really. We could say Ortho, you know, it's not like Ortho wasn't fruitful, but it produces records like that, whereas the bands that are supposed to be, but it fails to produce just like ripping straight up BM, right? I think Antaeus was the big candidate for that, but like that stuff is pretty hit or miss.
Yeah.
This is, and was operating within a much more deliberately restricted sphere than this, right? Antaeus was basically Marduk plus. Right, whereas this is very full spectrum, as you say. A couple other things. Really resistant of certain songwriting tendencies in modern BM.
Very. We'll definitely be getting into that.
But also of certain songwriting tendencies in old BM. You could almost imagine that they wrote this while listening only to death metal. There's sharp discontinuity in the songwriting. There's a lot of focus on leads and on brute heaviness. And as they shift riff styles, they're often dramatic shifts in timbre. It's not skits. It's not like it doesn't sort of. It's not like death metal. One thing after another, but there's a lot of death metal type songwriting here. Other important thing, structurally, this is a very short record, and it's one that I started out being quite unsure about. It does a weird thing. It's got the Bathory 2 intro thing, I think. The second track, The Predominance, at first I was like, it's almost like an overture. So, like, it's a really weird track. It's the length of a full track on here. It's about, you know, like, a lot of short tracks on here. It's like 4 minutes. But you get sort of starts off with like a bad French riff, just like a really sort of really cliche French BM riff that you could have heard in 2012 too. It rolls along, and then we get a kind of cool breakdowny thing, and we're back to the bad French riff, and then we get interrupting Dark Throne riff, and suddenly it's really exciting. And then just when you think it's building to something, just silence. And then just a big dramatic ambient spoken word thing. And then they just zero in on this really nasty Orthodox riff that sounds like it's at the beginning of a song, not the end. Just tons of tension, kind of descending, self-deconstructing melody. It's like the kind of thing that you would... it's not a climactic riff. It's a sort of attack riff. And they end the song on that. And which would be so weird. It just ends. Which would be so weird, except they're thinking with the whole album in mind. So when I got through that track, you know, I was at first sort of I was like, whoa, this really isn't good. And then I was like, oh, interesting, whoa, okay, maybe there's something going on here. But then the track just ends, and I'm like, what the fuck? Then we get into the third track, and I'm like, oh. So it's like the first track kind of is a, you know, like an overture or something in classical music, right? Or might have... Or like, say, the first movement of a symphony might showcase themes that show up again throughout. Or
Yes.
the beginning,
Yes.
and if you're really big on this kind of like germinal structure in a symphony, the beginning of the first movement will showcase parts that show up again throughout the first movement, things like that. This doesn't exactly do that. They're not giving you like themes that come back, but it showcases how they're writing songs here.
It's showing all the constituent parts of the record.
Yes, yeah, it shows, maybe except for one. But yes, it's showing all the constituent parts, and it's showing, like, this is how we write songs. Any expectation you get is going to be reversed. You know, the places you focus on, the focus is going to be shifted. You're going to be asked to focus on things you wouldn't necessarily normally, and we're going to surprise you, and you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's one of the most crucial aspects about this record, which is one of the things that makes it so. Because in a sense, this is a very straightforward album, and in a sense, it's not. Just because it thrives off of subverting the listener's expectations. So on one hand, it's like you need to know a lot about black metal to understand what makes these features surprising. And you also have to be primed to be surprised by those things. You know, this is a record that relies on intimate familiarity with black metal idioms in order to break those rules.
Yeah, it's a late black metal record. It could not have been written in 1992, but it could have been written in 2012, because it just depends on knowing about everything up till then. So now, let's go. So we've got this sense of their sensibilities, and now we'll go into Unearthly Forgotten Memory. And
this is where the album begins.
Yeah, exactly. It's and I'm just going to drop us in on the one kind of thing they didn't showcase yet on that sort of first primer track is the big riff. So here's a big riff.
Man, there's no reason that, like, ascending chromatic thrash riff at the end should work so well, but it's just it's a ripper when it pops in.
Yeah, and if they can make the death metal guy like a thrash riff, they've really accomplished something.
Exactly. But I mean, that's like, listening back to that, like, close listening to each riff, it's like, there's, like, a weird surprise tucked into every one of those riffs.
Yeah, so let's talk about the big... So first, with the big riff, what would you describe as the weird surprise there?
Oh, well, for the big riff, you're talking about the blast riff after that?
You know, the more consonant melodic trem riff that you hear close to the beginning of the sample. You get a bit of a thrash.
Yeah, after the palm muted one. Yeah, it's like lightning. Like the intervals are... They're floating around. I mean, you've heard similar stuff in black metal, but they're these wildly swinging intervals. There's like odd string skipping going on and shit. It's just it's a black metal riff, but it's so sleek and so kind of chromed off and hyper modern in a way, but still very fitting in with the sort of mayhemic thing that they've always been very good with.
I like you. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I mean, that's how I describe certain Spite Extreme Wing riffs. Yeah. Like on Cosmic Crater. Yeah, like Lightning. It definitely has it. All the big riffs have that. They're simple, very clear forms. And this one in particular is, well, they're not all Lightning-like, though, but they all have that kind of clarity and direction. This one, they all have that sense of line in them. But this in particular is this, yeah, like leaping, fast-moving, up and down moving lines, very lightning-y.
Yeah,
right?
it's just incredible aggression and intensity.
Yeah, the harmony on it is just, I mean, burning, right?
Yeah, the whole thing is white hot. I love it.
And it's kind of a DSO thing in the harmony, but kind of not. I think a lot of the stuff on this record that's really distinctive about it is it's not like there's nothing on here that you could say this is a Corpus Christi riff, but there's so many ways of playing riffs that could only be by these guitarists.
Yeah,
I think it's possible that they're both writing for guitar here. At least judging by Metal Archives. And yeah, that is a player's personal inflection there.
Yeah, they have a fascinating way of kind of modifying stock riff forms and filtering them through their own personalities. And that extends to the structure as well. I love that weird fucking head fake moment with the little, like, two, like, clean bar chord, orthodox thing right before it jumps back into that cruising thrash riff. It's like, it's preparing for a whole back half of a song that never happens. Like this thing's constantly redirecting you,
Yeah, well, I mean, even just the big riff never comes back.
Yeah.
It you could, right? And so it immediately goes to just Interrupting Darkthrone riff. And those are, and what those are, that's black metal embracing the half blast. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of dung, 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 dung. And playing it, I mean, that's almost structured like a Christian riff. That kind of like a simplified black metal version of it. But I really love that just sort of heavy downbeat, percussive blast riffing. And it sounds, what it really sounds like is skull-crushing black metal by Morte, right? And the moments that you said were inspired by that on the record we reviewed last year. And so I guess if there's something that's like a Morte or Corpus Christi riff, it's probably that. And, there are things like it on Antaeus records and whatever, but this is really a thing that these guys do and do really well. And
it's also kind of the closest thing to, like, if we're going to say there's a Portuguese kind of sound, it's probably that, specifically. Because Corpus Christi is an interesting band because of the Portuguese scene. They've never sounded especially Portuguese for the most part. They've always been a lot more rooted in kind of like traditional, second wave Scandinavian stuff. Here you're starting to hear some of those distinctions of it being Portuguese creep out more. Yeah.
It sounds both more French and more barbaric, and that seems true of a lot of the Portuguese stuff. But yeah, so that kind of just crushing riff, that hits as a hook, right? That's like when it's not like, oh shit, they stopped the epic riff. They just play the epic riff like A, B, A, B. and then just dun 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 dun. And just like on the Morte record, that is a payoff moment, right? Yeah. That is a central dramatic moment. And it's a thing. And so this record is that technique. Like, you know what I said, like, oh, Morte makes the triumphant moment. Morte has these kind of simple Transylvanian hunger-style epic melodies, but it makes the triumphant moment, the skull-crushing moment. And this record is that technique writ large and used in tons of different ways.
That's exactly right. That's one of the most interesting things about this record in particular, and it's like it's heightened here compared to older Corpus Christi, is the idea that these guys consciously prioritize types of black metal riffs radically differently from like most of black metal today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, you could call the technique Portuguese riff switching, but not to be mistaken with Brazilian wife swapping, which is, I think, an old that's an old VHS tape.
I found that in my dad's sock drawer. So let me get to the track after yours, Fragment and Chaos Disharmony. So this is going to relate to a lot of the things we've been talking about, about these kind of like whiplash-inducing changes. And another thing that I like is Corpus Christi has traditionally been not like aping the old school, but there's a direct line from just traditional second wave black metal to what these guys do. They've never been imitative of old school black metal, but it's always just been a logical continuation of all those things. Mm-hmm. Something that happens on this record is a really cool kind of contrasting technique where you'll have very old school, very traditional stuff butting up against very modern, very unusual shit. So let's listen to a couple minutes of Fragment and Chaos Disharmony. This is a pretty short track. It's super punchy, though. So you're going to have like a couple just very, very traditional, very coloring within the lines, sort of Norse Svart metal riffs. They're very good, but they're definitely designed to be extremely conventional. And then something happens that I've never heard Corpus do. Man, the moment when I first listened to this album, the moment that happened, I was just like, what the fuck is going on, dude? Just the whiplash into this, like, very... that's not directly comparable to anything. It's a hardcore breakdown built out of orthodox parts.
Yeah, and not in the way that the French bands do it.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like way closer to an actual hardcore breakdown.
Yeah, it's like, because obviously, we've talked about the French Orthodox guys listening to like skronky hardcore and incorporating a bunch of that, but that's not what's happening here. They're using straight Orthodox parts to make like a crushing pit riff.
And it's more like, it's both more like, it's both more like black metal riffing and more like, it's like, the rhythmic inflections in it, it's sort of it has that sort of springy springy viciousness that you get in like, I don't know, like 90s Holy Terror bands or like a band like Ascension or like New Lows or like they're 2000s imitating that style. But it's not like they're like power chord it's like one of those like 6-note power chord breakdowns as opposed to like a beatdown.
Well, yeah, and what's also interesting is that like it takes the shape of a hardcore breakdown, but there's no like big crushing chord.
I mean, it's really close to a Jane Doe breakdown.
Oh yeah, that would be fair. Yeah,
but like there aren't any of the screamo chords.
Well, yeah, and I think it's really interesting how it's like there's none of the parts you associate with a hardcore breakdown. There's no like big chords. I mean, that's just like a winding single note phrase, and the negative space around it is what makes it heavy. It's fascinating.
Well, and what makes it heavy is the rhythm of it. It just that's got that whiplash thing. You don't need a big thick tone to play a breakdown. You can just play a single thin note and do that.
Yeah,
or a single thin string, right?
And so apart from that breakdown, any other band would have ended on that, or they would have like faded out on that. No, you've got like a couple riffs after that, very short, very punchy, wrapping it up, and then the stuff before it, the more traditional kind of like Norse style riffs. Listening back, there's crazy shit going on in the bass. Underneath these relatively simple kind of unadorned riffs, there's
basically Norsecore riffs.
But there's this really fluid, kind of beautiful. The bass is really the lead instrument underneath those riffs. There's just like every single aspect that you're about to dismiss as kind of like stock or conventional always has some sort of twist put onto it.
I mean, we gotta, and about the follow-up to the breakdown. I mean, another way you would follow up the breakdown is, like, by literally treating it as a breakdown in a conventional sense, and maybe you'd go back to a verse riff or something. But, the other thing it's like is an Emperor breakdown. Dun, 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 and I actually was listening to some of that Belgian Hate Thousand stuff the other day, and they do breakdowns modeled on Emperor. Crazy.
That stuff is so weird.
It's so cool. Listening to Congress. Anyway, so that is a very it's an Emperor breakdown that is delivered in this kind of highly modern abrasive way. It's really cool. But right after that, right, instead of going back to a verse riff or going to some ambient bullshit, they just steamroller 6/8 Norwegian riff. And like it's like it's just doing that at all. It's like the hardcore technique of breakdown chaining, right? But a black metal band would never think to do that, frankly. But they just did it. And it's a really well-written riff. And you could imagine there may have been a version of this song that just had the blast riffs and then went directly to that. That's sort of the 6/8 thing. And then they just added the breakdown in between. And suddenly, like it... Yeah.
Well, this is this whole record is interesting because it's like... Because, we've talked a lot on the show about how, really liking... a lot of black metal nowadays that's sort of reaching back toward a more full band energy, a more kind of live style, little bits of improv here and there, stuff that's like more clearly kind of jammed out and organic, and that is great. However, this record is so clearly like written top down. You know, it's you can imagine that it's like there's a way this album could have been written on paper before they even touch their instruments at any point to like play the songs together. And this is an example of why that can like actually be a good thing sometimes. You just have to have immense amounts of experience behind you.
Yeah, and I mean it's sort of them doing like a lot of the methods of surprise that are on this, and the kind of energy in the playing are probably learned and developed with that kind of more ragged shoot from the hip playing you get in Morte. Right?
Yeah.
Like this has learned from all of that, and you know that kind of improv gives you a kind of improv and spontaneity and whatever gives you a kind of freedom. This is very composed music, but it's written with a ton of freedom.
Yes, exactly. And, well, actually, speaking of Morte, it is just kind of funny, like, listening to Nocturnus play. You know, it's not very clear who's playing what across this record, but listening to Nocturnus doing this almost, like, deliberately fumbling stuff with Morte, and then hearing him just, like, whip out these crazy fucking surprisingly dexterous riffs on this, and you're like, yeah, Morte, they're deliberately drunk and playing down.
I was gonna say, imagine how drunk they were.
It's like
we knew they were drunk, but like
they had to be so drunk.
they had to be properly Capricornist.
So speaking of Nocturnus, my next sample is off of the track To the End to the Void. Nocturnus, one thing that is clear is that he's the vocalist on this record, and I gotta say his vocal performance is pretty exceptional.
Yeah.
He's really good, and something on this record that it feels like it's coming out more and more lately is reaching back to like the Attila Sihar kind of theatrical style. Something's in the water. I don't know if we're just picking up on the right albums now, but it feels like that's coming back in a big way.
You've always looked for stuff like that, but I think there's definitely more of it.
Yeah, it feels like it's coming back around. And so Nocturnus's performance on this is clearly very inspired by that. So this section off To the End to the Void is probably one of my favorite vocal parts on the record. Really shows off the whole range of what he can do. But then the riffing also we should pay close attention to, because I think some of the riffs in this section are a really good roadmap to the guitar approach of the album as a whole. So yeah, obviously, Nocturnus Horrendous' vocals in that part are fucking outstanding. Like, it's hard to articulate to people just how difficult it is to weave in those like genuinely melodic tonal characteristics while still having that much heat on your vocal performance. It's super fucking hard to do. And it's beautiful and it's evocative. It's extremely theatrical. I mean, this is kind of, I would say, like the climax moment of the record.
Mm-hmm. Maybe on From Here to Nothing.
Yeah.
Because there's another vocal moment I've got to call attention to where he just like straight up sings, but it comes directly out of the rest of the voice. It's not like a different voice he's putting on, and he just hits some heavy like basically like he sings like if Quorthon could sing.
Yeah.
And it's really, really cool.
It's like the it's sort of like the highest level of singing you want in black metal. It's like technically
that's the yes
you want it, you know.
Yeah. Anything past that is power metal. But it's really cool. So I mean, I would almost say like this record is. Well, I'll come back to the climax of the album question. Let's keep talking about what's distinctive here.
Well, another thing is like just the riff figures in this are, I think, kind of paradigmatic for the whole record. Like for instance, that super simple like big riff that they drop out, they do the solo guitar back in. It's just this very simple kind of chord progression riff. And it's gesturing towards, a huge triumphant, dun, 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 something like that. But instead they twist it, they darken it, they make the last interval something sort of more furtive and nocturnal. They're always resisting the urge to do the easy big thing. I mean,
wait, and which riff is that? Is that the first or the second one you're talking about?
When they do the dropout and you
solo
guitar.
Yeah. Because the first one is a great example of a riff that is like high tension but very epic. That is a great, and it sort of hints at it's using techniques of that sort of like chord change with sliding half-step chord changes with sustained kind of arpeggios over it that the French bands use to make stuff that sounds melancholy, but it doesn't sound melancholy, it just sounds powerful. The part where he's like going to town on the vocals. And then the dropout, yes, it's like, oh shit, are they about to like... Yeah, I see exactly what you mean. The beginning of the riff sets up an expectation they're about to drop like a DSO riff there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they don't. They just do something. They do something weirder. And you know what I think I've kind of channeled it. What I like about this record is like there's a sense of mystery to it. At this point we become so sort of, in a sense, like inoculated by these stock riff forms. The expectations are just so ingrained as people who have listened to thousands of black metal albums. It becomes very easy to just know where every song is gonna go. But this actually has that quality of like when you're younger listening to it, it's like, oh, these guys have access to some sort of mysterious mystical knowledge and shit. Yeah. And it's like that comes through here. I think that's you so rarely feel that way about black metal records anymore. It's just fucking lovely. Awesome.
Yeah. So speaking of it being fucking awesome, this is one of the only moments on the record where they do. So even though that second riff really the second riff, it's like, oh shit, are they going to an even bigger riff? But they actually go to a riff that works a lot like the riff just before it, and except more furtive and more sort of more sort of churning and tense. But then they go to the blast riff at the end is, you'd expect based on what sort of, they do have a way of writing songs. It's just not the way you expect. So based on the way they have of writing songs, you might expect at this point some sort of like big, skull crush blast or a thrash riff or a breakdown. And instead, they just keep blasting. They just go back to blasting, and it's another one of these kind of nocturnally soaring riffs. and that almost sounds like a hook riff, even though it would be another band's verse riff. This is the only time on the record where they just, like, I would say this is their, like, orthodox BM song. They, like, chain together 3 big trem riffs.
Yeah, it's like...
With one of them being, oh my god, death metal guy, they got away with the forbidden thing, the spoopy orthodox arpeggio.
They can
right?
actually pull it off, yeah.
Yeah, that middle riff is the mid-tempo arpeggio part, and they nail it. Yeah, speaking also of, like, climaxes or big riffs, right? Like, we actually haven't sampled the 2 songs on the record that have the biggest hooks. That is From Here to Nothing, which has some big melodic riff and that kind of soaring power metal-y vocal. And then For I Am All, which has a stonker of a Migla riff, basically.
yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah. And, you know, it's... So you're not... When we talk about how exciting this record is, you're not even getting the things that are the sort of cathartic moments on it. And what else? Yeah, so we've talked about it a bit already, right? But the sort of simplicity of the big riffs, right? They are, most of them are just a few chords or notes long. They're not these long flowing melodies. They're not fancy dense chords, and they're quick. They're not drawn out over many bars, right? Everything on this record is quick. You're not going to hear like
indulgent.
There's and there's nothing like there's also no like I don't know, there's no like jackhammer wall blast, or very little of it. The most was on your first sample. There's not like droning parts, right? It's just they are these condensed phrases that sort of produce a climax in the song, and then they move on. Really disciplined, really sort of seasoned master stuff. It's a confidence thing. It's like they provide the function of triumphant release in these songs without any ornamentation.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. There's a distillation that occurs. That's really interesting compared to so many bands that are trying to just do bigger and bigger versions of those things.
Yeah. And so this is in terms of like the cultural polemic, right, going on here, right? In terms of like the statement this is making, this is very close to a lot of records we've reviewed that are deliberately austere or severe or not hook filled, right? But the record is hook-filled. Yeah. That's the thing. This could be a very austere, scowling record, and instead it's like scowling and cackling.
It is almost cool wizard music in a way.
Yeah. It's fun. It's also motorcycle. It's also Devil's motorcycle music, right?
I was talking to Nocturnus Horrendous. We've been in contact since we covered the Morde record, and he is a big motorcycle fan himself. So it makes sense.
We just know these people, man. It's So in terms of like going with that, Heinous. Last track on the record. Already covered a lot of this ground, but one thing, right, is just because they emphasize these kinds of change-ups, expectation reversals, discontinuities that are kind of death metal-y, they still understand that black metal generates power from repetition, right? They're just doing it in a really focused way. They give you just enough of the thrash riff to do that. They give you just enough of the, the skull crush blast to do that. But they're never repeating shit just because. And so you get, like, on the kind of tracks we haven't sampled, right, From Here to Nothing and For Eyeball, you get these long sustained releases where they're like, yeah, here we'll go for it. We'll just repeat the riff like fucking 15 times or 16 times. There's another way of repetition that they often avoid, which is sort of cyclical repetition, right? Mm-hmm. These songs are relatively linear compared to a lot of BM songwritings. But on the last track, Heinous, they do some really well-shaped cyclical repetition. We come in, we've had an A riff, we've had a B riff with some spooky ghost blasting, then we are back into the A riff, and just, this is so sick.
There's so many cool moments just accumulating over the course of that.
Yeah, so the big one to talk about, right, is that right, the goblin riff, and then the and so I mean, like, that is a kind of riff that they just don't write anymore.
Yes, that's very correct.
That is nasty. And it's different from the Half-Blast stuff, but it's a similar thing of, here's a kind of thing that other bands, when they gesture towards it, use it as filler, right? This is, or as default, right? That is fucking catchy, right?
Yeah,
that is
primary, you know.
It's a massive hook. Yeah, exactly. It's a massive hook. And it's also just, like, kills, right? That's so aggressive. And it sounds like the first and, like, almost just random association. It's been years since I've heard it, but the energy is almost like that. It's a way of hearing Darkthrone that you get on, like, that first and All in the Thrak record or whatever.
Yeah.
Or it's kind of a Night of the Graveless, or it's kind of a, I Am the Black Wizard's riff a little bit too. It's just, it's all these kinds of, like, really severe trem lines from the early Norse stuff. And then just, bam, colossal riff, monolithic riff. And I use that advisedly because that's a great example of the kind of simplicity on these riffs. It's really deliberate and sort of unfolds kind of slowly. That is a great example of a mystery riff. Like, that is
Yes.
the first part of it is just these, like, two rep wind up of, like, stock French stuff, and then it just goes woof. And it has really dense chords, especially on the second part of it. And what that is really is it's like a certain kind of DSO riff from their old stuff. like the chorus on Sola Fide 1, he does this like pyrotechnic like run to launch. There's a kind of like, I don't know, is it a volta or something? He just launches this. There's a 2-part melody, and he does this complicated launch, and then when Miko comes in, it's just da 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 da. I can't exactly remember it, but it's really simple. I listened to it today to check. But so these guys, and you know, that guy's an incredibly sophisticated guitarist. These guys have wrapped their head around things that are kind of idiosyncratic to his style of playing. Like that's the way they sustain those notes at the end. It's not a complicated hook riff. It's the thing that is the payoff is just 3 chords and it's monolithic.
All right, we are back, wrapping up our roundup of Portugal in mid-2022 with the new Candelabrum record, Nocturnal Trance, out on, of all things, Hell's Headbangers. Very, very odd. Like, I've seen multiple people say that. It's like, Candelabrum is on fucking HH now? That's very strange. So, black metal guy, should we just start arguing now?
Yeah, let's fucking throw down.
This is a rare treat. I mean, it's really only been like
I'm up on the ropes, man.
It's really only a handful of times on the podcast that our opinions have diverged so intensely.
Yeah, I honestly, I expected you to hate this too.
No, I actually really like this. But right before we get into that, just a little bit of background info for people that don't know. So Candelabrum is a band that has been around for a little while now, since 2014. This new one is the third full-length record, and the connection's never been made explicit and personnel's never been revealed, but this is almost certainly the same guy as Black Silas. So...
yeah, someone in the YouTube comments sort of suggested that, but it would be weird if it wasn't. It would be like...
It would actually be weirder if it was another guy.
yeah, so, because, like, that's obviously the main reference point for this.
Yeah, so the earliest Candelabrum stuff, I think I heard Necrotelepathy when it came out in 2016, and I didn't really like it. It was, I mean, back then it was very explicitly, this is the chilled-out version of Black Silas. This new record, I don't think I've listened to Portal, so I don't really know the transitional phase there, but this one really doesn't sound like Black Silas anymore. And frankly, I'll go out and my hot take is this isn't a black metal record. Fundamentally.
I'll agree.
Yeah, this isn't black. I mean, Black Silas is like kind of arguably not black metal either, but it's like more like black metal. Candelabrum at this point
more riffy.
Yeah. So... this is, I think, part of basically a scene of blackened atmospheric music that is congealing right now that doesn't have a name. And I think that within a few years it's going to have a name and it's going to break off from metal entirely. That's probably the hottest take I can give.
Name some other members of this scene for the people.
Of like the style that I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I would say like a big one would be the Midnight Betrothed record that we covered last year that you also hated.
Yep, hate.
That would be that. Probably some of the like Grindstone Records guys, like Old Nick and them, because it's not really black metal. Lots of just sort of like... there's a lot of guys out there who are just like...
Kekta Rock is sort of could go either way, right?
I think we'll see what happens on the next Kekta Rock.
Yeah, the guitar playing is so substantially black metal that it doesn't really fall into this category, but the mood he's exploring and those kind of interlude tracks gesture more in this direction.
So the way I see it is a combination of like it sounds absurd, but aesthetically you get it. It's like DSBM, it's sad boy hip hop, it's like witch house, and like sad anime soundtracks. Those are the primary ingredients.
Do you hear any of the witch house or hip hop here?
I feel like I hear the witch house here a lot. Yeah. I definitely, like, you can't hear like kind of the Salem thing on this a little bit?
Not really. Salem has, like, big, heavy... I mean, I don't know that stuff well at all. I mean, I listened to White Ring a bit back in the day because I saw them live. It's much simpler than... They're sort of a little more like an industrial band. I mean, I would associate Salem with big, rumbling, kind of fat bass lines, fat with a PH. Yeah, and like drums.
That's fair, but that's like... Okay, so imagine Witch House as something that was supposed to be built purely for home listening and not for the club, Yeah,
I mean, I kind of see it. This is rhythmically super different. It's...
Yeah.
I mean, are there things about the texturing that are very Witch House?
I think to a degree. I mean, really, I'm talking more in.
Doesn't it need a chick to qualify as Witch House? You have to have a goth chick.
Well, I don't know the gender identity of
there has to be a witch. There has to be a witch in the house.
in the hizzy, as we used to say.
There's some witches in this house.
No, it's really what I'm talking about is more a matter of like mood and tones and aesthetics.
Yeah.
This whole melange of sort of like modern, vaguely gothy, spooky, sad stuff. And I think, so for this Candelabrum record, we'll definitely talk it through and argue about it, but this is really just a taste thing. I have so much more time for this kind of, like, fucking mopey sit alone in your room shit than you do, I guess.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that kind of thing, and so, well, I mean, you describe it. I've been talking, so you can get into your take on it.
Aside from what we mentioned before, another reference point for this might be Carved Cross. However, I didn't love, like, Carved Cross is not my go-to listening, but I thought that was quite good. I got what was distinctive about Carved Cross. And
that's probably an influence here.
And although Carved Cross kind of isn't black metal, it kind of is. The main similarity is that this is really sparse and composed like electronic music. And it is very organic. Unlike Witch House, it has very organic textures. Right? This is just all coming from, like, echoey synths and guitars and pedals and stuff. It's not heavily digitized. I like that, right? Okay, lots of ringing, open, organic sound, kind of improvisatory stuff happening over time, hypnotic repetition. I dig all that shit. I even kind of dig the mood it's going for, which I can get into more. And I sort of liked it. I was disposed to like it at the beginning of the record, but then I was just like, ugh. It's one of the only records I felt like it was like it hurt me to listen to it. I felt life leaching out of my wounds. It like the Midnight Betrothed was like that. The Gautama Buddha, we were just both laughing too hard to feel that way, I think.
I still resent that one a lot.
Yeah. I started to feel I kind of resent this one in the way that you resented the fucking like the Nihilification.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
Yeah. Like, it's just like, I don't think you can criticize something for being low effort, but I don't. So that's how you felt about that one. That's not exactly where I'd come at it from, but it's something similar to that. It's just like, there's just no fucking there.
There's no content.
I think exactly. I would say Nihil Invocation had a concept that I had more time for than you did, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is a cool concept, but I would just straight up say it fails in execution. And maybe because of where he's placing the emphasis in this formula. So maybe it's a little neither here nor there and needs to go one direction or the other.
I see. Okay, so yeah, that's interesting.
There are parts of the record that I like, and I got samples that include parts I like. But it's as it stands, I don't think it really works for me. So let's go with the first track, Crystalline Telesthesia. This is first riff that's a cool riff. It's kind of like a Black Silas thing, but the mood is a little bit Kektarak also. It's got that kind of pleasant, solemn reverie, right? Like, there are ghosts, but they want to help you with alchemy. Duh.
You know what's going to make this fucking review great is because the part where it starts to suck for you is the part where it starts to rule for me.
I know.
You're like a fucking disappointed stepdad. It's like you realized I don't have the makings of a varsity athlete.
Well, son, I'm going to have to do something else with that college fund. Like,
exactly.
Okay, buy a larger boat.
All right, so get into what you think sucks here.
Oh, man.
Or the contrast of what is good versus what sucks.
Yeah, so the first riff is like, it's really cool. It's kind of high speed. It's kind of crisply delivered compared to the rest of the record. Like there's like good tight picking there. And then at the end, he's got that drone note, and then at the end, he's forming cool chords by, I think, layering leads. Something like that. And, that's obviously where the melodic weight of it is, in these strangely diverging lead harmonies that sound, they're kind of these... it's a lot like a kind of harmony you got on the Kekta Rock last year, is all I can say.
Yeah, I heard the exact thing you're talking about, like the exact figure. It's like a harmonic figure that was all over that Kekta Rock record.
Very open intervals, white notes, white notes on the keyboard, whole step, sort of soaring and harmonizing with each other, and a heavy use of drone, right? The thing that makes it better, right, in that case, the thing that really helps, as with the Kekta Rock, is there's a lot of reverb, right? And, I mean, this band has way more reverb. This is like Black Silica levels of... Actually, it's pronounced Black Killick, eh?
I was literally trying to see if there was an established pronunciation the other day. There's fucking nobody can agree. There's like 4 different pronunciations of words.
That's kind of cool. I think maybe it's written to be impossible to pronounce, but like the so yeah, it's got that kind of. There's an interesting harmony there, and just a emotionally dense harmony there, and it has these and it's strengthened by the fact that the reverb lets these layers sort of multiply. Right? It's really like you're hearing 3 of one note and 3 of the other, and they're all interacting in weird ways. All these overtones. And yeah, that's cool. It makes you want to go wander around in the twilight. It's a mood that's. I was thinking at the beginning, like, oh, cool. Is this going to be kind of like, that kind of Dead Can Dance mood in black metal or whatever, right? Then.
Is that where, as you say, it hits the suck button?
Yes. Dum, 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 dum. And, suddenly there I heard it. I heard the trip hop. Or no, sorry, I said trip hop, not Witch House. That's what... Trip hop. It was like, oh, this is like fucking... Witch House is just trip hop with trap production, right? It's the same idea, but like...
Yeah, for goth girls.
This is... Yeah. Witch House is like... It's like the trip hop idea with the Memphis influence and more like industrial. But like... It's like the same synthesis, right? We get a slinky female chanteuse and some urban beats. And in that, I had this depressing thought the other day when I was listening to bad beat music in the bar. Just like, oh God, everything is just fucking Portishead. And now I hear it here. That kind of like just sinks into that like laid back kind of boom, tum, boom, tum,
well, you see,
boom.
Well, it's so like unintentionally revealing, like some of the stuff that you say, because it's just like, well, I'm like, shit, I like Portishead a lot.
I think Portishead is fine in itself. It's just like a kind of like, I think Portishead's a little bit goofy and has had a very has had this weirdly outsized influence on culture. I think a lot of things influenced by Portishead. I think a lot of things are anticipated by it without maybe realizing it and are pretty goofy.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
But, like, I can hear that thing you were pointing out now there. And so you get that kind of descending thing for a minute, and there's nothing inherently wrong with doing that for a sec. Okay, fast, slow down. And then it goes, he just commits to this da, 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 da. I mean, just really, really just, like fundamental rock and roll chord progression. Like, kind of, but obviously harmonized in this same kind of layered, maybe multiple leads at this point, layered leads, echoes. There's more harmony and rich texture in it, but it just clunks along with that dum 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 dum. I think it's 1, 2. He uses a lot of twos, like dum 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 dum, something like that. I don't know. Maybe even it's just like things like that.
Just simple fucking whole step,
Yes,
intervals.
And the problem is he really commits to that. That is the entire rest of the fucking 9-minute song.
Yeah,
is that riff. And and I say riff, it's obviously not a riff, it's a chord progression, right? Nothing.
Because you knew what I was going to do.
Yes, it's a chord progression. Haha, we can anticipate each other's it's not riff-based music, bro.
Yes.
Everyone gets that card once per episode. It's... Yeah, they're chord progressions, and they're chord progressions that are mostly just the root note that's being boosted with fucking reverb. And it keeps dragging along like that, and he layers in some more noise and does some variations, and all of that stuff could be cool. But this terrible chord figure is just in the forefront, and he's hanging all this weight on it. The problem is, I think he's trying to get it to act like I kept expecting him to, like, do something with it, but he's, like, trying to get it to act like a riff. And, to me, it's like, this really works like post-black. Like atmospheric black metal channel kind of shit. This is like the raw version of that. It's the same idea. You have these kind of like big, sort of tender, epic, open, kind of open phrase melodies, and thin harmony that's being bolstered by reverb abuse.
Okay. So what it kind of boils down to is that it's like sort of empty of content to you.
Absolutely, yeah. And that chord progression is pointing at a mood, which is a mood I'm amenable to, right? And it's, there's a billion melodies you could put over it. There's a million chord progressions like that would be better. But it is purely pointing at the outline of a feeling. And, in outline, you could write something that is exactly the same album with different, like, note and chord choices in those places, and I'd like it a lot more.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. So, and then the other thing to mention is, like, the vast majority of this album is, like, the parts that you hate. Like,
yes,
the parts
absolutely.
with, like, high-speed riff-based stuff is very rare on the record.
No, that is the only time he does a high-speed riff on it. And, that's fair enough. Not everything needs to be high-speed, catchy riffs, right? In fact, better that it not be, right? That's the first thing is like, oh, Black Celica riff. Nothing like that on the rest of the album. So there's something admirable in committing to the stuff that's not. He knows how to write catchy riffs. He knows how to give the people what they want. But then he just really commits to this other idea. It's just an idea that I hate.
That's fair. Okay, so I guess, so up front, one of the big things for me is just going to be, I really, really, really just like ultra minimal plotting DSBM. which is like, which in and of itself is like basically not black metal. It's like listening to something like fucking Knuckle Clang is like, can you call it black metal? Yeah, he's shrieking and like the guitars have raw production, but it's like musically, does this have anything to do with real black metal? Not fucking really. So immediately I have more patience for that. So basically where you see it as empty of content and you see it as, just like hanging way too much on these simple chord progressions. Yeah, but that's like kind of the point to me, is that I feel like, well, first of all, you're not supposed to like fucking like intensely listen to this. I don't think that's the point. This is soundtrack music fundamentally. Soundtrack for what? I don't know, like introspection, just being bummed by yourself, wandering around some ruins of something,
Yeah, but I could make a mixtape with like 50 different tracks for that are better.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have the exact same mood. It's like, this is definitely...
Yeah, they would. The Cacta Rock record has this mood.
Oh, I don't think so. I think this is way more nihilistic and way more, like, hopeless than Cacta Rock. Cacta Rock is, like, fundamentally about, gay positive stuff at the end of the day. Which, that's one of the reasons I loved for that. This is the flip side of that, where this is, like, sort of purely negativistic and hopeless music. But on a musical level, I think that what's going on is well, it's not riff-based music, bro. But more to the point, it's like, I don't think that it's so much that the chord progression is what the music is hanging off of. Rather, it's just sort of an anchor that other things develop around. I mean, this is very clearly like timbral and textural music primarily.
No, I agree.
So I'm not bothered by the chord progression stuff because that's merely a sort of like anchoring route to explore the possibility space generated by these strange tones and all this ring. It's like the primary instrument on this album is not a guitar or a keyboard. It's fucking delay.
Why do you like this and not so much the Ten-Horned Beast? Because I think I'm saying about this what you said about the Ten-Horned Beast.
Well, I mean,
you're making the same case that I made about that.
I don't hate the Ten-Horned Beast.
Yeah, that's true. Fair.
But it's also I like bummer sad boy shit a lot. That is like an inherent thing that I really enjoy in the same way that like big murky post-industrial stuff is just like that just works for you.
Yeah. I think we are, the more minimal and austere the music gets, the closer you come to fundamental differences of taste. Like, do you like this sound?
So for instance, let me, because I'm going to go head to head on this. Let's listen to, right from where you left off, another couple minutes of Crystalline Telesthesia, and then I'll try to explain kind of what's going through my head after we listen to that. Fuck yeah, dog. I love feeling sad. So listening to that back, that's all hanging off the parts that you hate. But when I'm listening to it, it's like the primary color melody in the middle of that is almost like ancillary to what's going on. I see the way these songs are constructed as, okay, so every one of these songs is like one or two melodic figures, basically. And then the way I see it is, okay, they're an anchor point, and then the real music is what's radiating out from that. Because, like, if you're listening closely, you'll hear lots of sort of subtle, ghostly other melodies popping up kind of in the background. You know, like, interesting.
I don't think there are other melodies. I think they just harmonize in different and interesting ways.
No, that's fair. Yeah, so there's different kind of harmonic things emerging. The production on this is really good. There's a lot of kind of three-dimensional space going on, a lot of stuff moving around between channels, sort of floating in this ethereal way. And then there's just, like, subtle augmentations of just, like, rhythm and pacing, you know, picking up the tempo, dropping it a little bit. In a sense, it's like, it's like, you know, the old chestnut about black metal as ambient or electronic music, kind of like you were talking about with Carved Cross. I just think I like exploring possibility spaces like this. Like the main melody itself, is it particularly compelling? No, but like it's almost a situation where if the melody was more highly specific, the music couldn't really function around it in the way that, you know what I mean?
I just find it like... No, I mean, you could do this with a 4-chord melody. I just don't... I guess maybe I just don't like this guy's ear.
That's fair. Yeah.
Like, it's a fundamental taste thing. It's, like, I find the melodies are... I get that a lot of the action is happening around the chords, the chord changes. I find them actively grating and interminable. You know, like, it's... And I think the trudge tempo with that is... too much for me.
You particularly dislike those kinds of, like, funeral slog tempos, I know.
That is true. Someone in the comments said this is kind of like Funeral Doom, and I'm like, fuck no. I mean, like, you can say that about Carved Cross, I think, because there's more structure there. But, like, yeah, this is... Yes, I do not like the trudge or the plod as rhythmic figures. And this is just that. And, you know, this sort of, like, bright do. Like, I'm not... Again, you know, Cacturag is filled with that. I'm not necessarily averse to things like that happening, but here it's just... Ugh.
Well, I get
you know, the guitar sounding like the harmonica. Like, you can have the guitar sounding like the harmonica, but don't make the riff like that.
Well, I think that's a synth.
Okay, right there, it's a synth. That makes sense. Okay, I hate that synth patch.
I get you. Well, I am noticing another thing. It's like in the way that you connect this to Atmo Black. Is because, like, a lot of these melodies, a lot of these melodic figures are really just, like, stripped down, like, summoning melodies. Summoning is sort of the accidental snake's head of the whole, like, Atmo Black movement.
No, I absolutely get what you mean. You take literally that melody, and you put some reverb and some polished... So you put some, like, stadium reverb and some, like, canned blast beats under it. It's like... And everyone's like... And you put a cover with some nature on it, and everyone in the comments is like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, but I do think the... I'll get more to this when we get to my second sample, but I do think there's an interesting thing that happens... when you're combining these very kind of bright major key melodies with an aesthetic and textures that just invert them so completely. I like the idea, and I like it in execution when most bands do this, of making sort of cheery, triumphant melodies into these sort of miserable fucking things. You know, it's like a special thing for me.
I certainly get that. It certainly makes more sense as music that is supposed to be miserable, but, like, Yeah, not my thing.
That's fair.
So with that, I think the strong... what I said up front about it being neither here nor there, right? Basically, I think there's still too much riff here. So yeah, Mirror of Divination, number 2, works exactly the same way as number 1, except worse. It's a bright 1/4.
Yeah.
Duh, 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 duh. But without the thrash riffs. And it's, that was the one where I really just wanted to kill myself, but not in the DSBM way. This track I sort of became interested again. There's the Poisonous Apparition in the middle.
And interesting, I think this is the weakest song on the album. This is very interesting. This
you like the fruity shit.
Well, yeah, no, you are correct though. It's like as we get to more and more minimal stuff, that's where we start to diverge. Like anything like more complex than this, we agree on like 99% of shit. It's only when you get this reduced,
That is very true. It's just like, I like the sound.
Yeah, that is what we're doing here. Is we're arguing between I don't like the sound versus I like the sound.
All right, so
I like the riff. I like the stock.
Yeah. So in this case, I like the absence of the riff.
Okay.
Not the echoey flute synth.
Oh man, it is always a joy when I can. I will say here, like this one, you're not even as that Midnight Betrothed. You like, it felt like you were almost mad at me when I brought that on the show.
Basically, I was like,
you were like, we need to have a fucking talk.
Yeah, I was like, how could you do?
You did the thing. It's like I'm making a scene in the shopping mall, and you're grabbing me by the back of the arm, right above the elbow. It's like, don't fucking do this.
No, I'm not getting you a second Slurpee.
Exactly.
This is, oh my god, this is like, so, okay, but so I wanted to talk about the part I liked, which was the part before that. That basically just happens there, and it doesn't really happen again for the rest of the record. We return to the basic kind of mood, but for the first 2 minutes, or I guess we start at 50 seconds in, really first 3 minutes, but you cut some build up. You just get this thing where the sort of the flute synth goes away, the sort of ascending things go away, and suddenly there's just the shadow of a melodic idea, just a pulse.
Yeah.
And that, but just with that, it's pulsed. He gets off the grid. The other thing I don't like about those chord progressions things is they're super gridded. If you're just playing the root note, like, it's they move rhythmically in exactly the expected way, et cetera, et cetera. So we've talked enough about grid stuff in the past. But yeah, so this is a little more, this gives them a chance to kind of lock into a groove of some kind, and the drums under it fill in, right? You start to get you were saying those are very summoning drums.
Yeah, just the sort of tribal tom hit stuff.
And that little alternating phrase would not be nearly as powerful on its own if it weren't interacting with this sustained drone over it, right? There's you got the woo, and under it you got doo, 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 doo. He might be using the flute synth there, but in a much more hollowed out and spectral way. Mm-hmm. I don't know. There I start to feel the different layers interacting and grinding with each other, and there's some rhythmic stuff going on. Ironically, right, there's even less riff here, but this is, aside from the first part of the record, this is the riffiest part on the album. Because it has there are fewer notes, and there's no melody happening, but there's just, like, more drive in it. This is more like a riff. It's also, it's a couple interesting things. It's also, like, the Graveland riff, right?
Yeah.
Da 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 da. If you go up, you da 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 da. Da 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 da. But here he's just doing alternating and also for him, he's getting down at the melodic figure that really fascinates him on this record, which is 1 2 2. Right? Dun, blah, dun, blah. Right? And there's a lot of tension. You can do a lot of 1 2 6 gets you a lot of powerful tension and stuff like that if you're doing more minor key sounding stuff. And here he's just playing with that kind of the way that the 2 wants to pull away from the 1, and just focusing in on that and playing the guitar, and putting all the reverb and the layers. Here it's the most electronic as it is on any point on the record, and I like this best. Forget about the melody, focus on interacting layers. And so there's, as the drumming takes off, right, there's a moment of
you broke out completely. Can you kind of restart at the beginning of your sentence?
Okay, how far back?
Just go 10 seconds ago. You dropped for a big chunk of time.
Okay, can you check in the that'd probably be a pain in the ass to check in the recording, right? But okay, so
I can just stitch something together. You can
I'll just start again. Okay, so I'll start on my last bullet point.
Sure.
So yeah, here where this is where it's the most electronic, and I think that is the strongest moment on the record, where he forgets about this kind of the melodies he's hanging so much weight on, and just focuses on these simple interacting layers, playing the reverb, and creating these sort of driving drum parts. There's even a moment of black metal-y drama when the vocals drop in there. We were listening, I was like, oh, that's heavy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, insofar as I think it's this kind of neither here nor there, I think if he pushes this more towards full electronic or a more austere version of electronic music, right? Because you're kind of also to you hear those kinds of melodies as part of this kind of synthy downer music that you like. Right?
Yeah, pretty much.
So if you pushed it towards more kind of abstract or noisy electronic music, I'd like it more.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I get the fundamental issues that you take with this. Yeah. Okay, that's fair. So my last sample, just real quick, I would go to the track Beyond, Back to the Origin, and again, we're going to hear kind of the summoning thing going on, these big, bold, kind of primary color melodies. But kind of, I had touched on it before. The thing that this record does that I like so much is taking these sort of triumphant, like almost happy melodies and contextualizing them in such a way that they become fucking miserable, you know? Through the kind of endless repetition, through the scratchiness of everything around it, it's like it's channeling a sort of like, you know, black metal, like, you know, wandering through the ruins of a great empire thing, you know, which is what a lot of black metal bands do. But the thing is, it's like the other black metal bands are like, you know, and we're gonna bring it back. You know, we're gonna have this like sort of pagan resurgence. This is like, no, that's not gonna happen. It's just fucking over. It's just it's done. It's dusted. Everyone's fucking dead. Nobody remembers it. You're gonna fucking die. I'm gonna die. It just everything is everything.
End
is
of Dark
off.
Souls 3.
Exactly. And
End of the DLC. Yeah.
And I think that I think that this track conveys that mood very successfully. Fuck yeah, I want to die.